Good morning. This is Bob Sweeney. I'm a principal and co-founder of Global Health Impact Fund and Global Health Impact Network. This is part of a series of interviews with our foremost CEOs in client companies. This morning, I'm going to be presenting Blake Richards, the CEO of Elucid Imaging.
Hey, Bob. It's a pleasure to be with you here today.
Hey, Blake, tell us a little bit about how you got into healthcare and about your background, and then we'll get into asking about your company.
Absolutely. Well, I had initially considered a career in finance, and that aligned quite well with my skill set, some of the internships I had done in undergraduate at Duke. But after school and having been exposed to all the opportunities in medtech, I started my career at Epic Systems out in Verona, Wisconsin, and felt an immediate attraction, an immediate opportunity to not only work on some very interesting technology, but also to be helping patients with what I did. And since that point, I've only ever worked in medical software, either as part of a company or as a consultant.
That's pretty interesting. So, how did you come to Elucid, and tell me a little bit about that adventure?
Sure. So I had worked with several medical technology startups in the past, either full time in strategy or in a consulting role, and I've been exposed to both cardiovascular and imaging startups. I, at that point, was working at Deloitte, but had met our founder several years earlier while I was working at Epic, helping him answer questions about interoperability and making sure the software was designed to be seamlessly integrated with the PACS and EMRs. And I began to do more and more work with our founder, Andrew Buckler, in a consulting capacity as they were progressing, having achieved their initial FDA clearance. And it was at that point that I realized there was not only an immense opportunity here, but the coalescence of our skill sets really worked well for where we wanted to take the company. So I was able to join full time as CEO, and we've been going strongly ever since.
So, tell us a little bit about what Elucid aims to do. What's the problem, and how does Elucid go about it, and what makes it different?
Absolutely. So I'll set up the standard problem for how we care for coronary artery disease today. So you have about 35 million patients being assessed with some form of non-invasive test for known or suspected coronary artery disease. Traditionally, that had been a stress test, but more and more commonly, we're seeing that be CT angiography. And if you've seen the chest pain guidelines that came out in October, that has promoted CT angiography to be the only class 1A diagnostic. So, highest level of evidence, highest level of support. So we expect CT angiography to continue to increase in prevalence and eventually become the dominant non-invasive testing modality. But regardless of the test that's being used, you as a physician ultimately have two, maybe three choices for what to do. You either send that patient to the cath lab for an invasive coronary angiography, or you put that patient on some form of statins or other therapeutic, unspecific to the patient. For those patients that are sent to the cath lab, and we'll say there's about 5 million or so of these per year, you're testing to see blood flow limitation to determine whether revascularization, chiefly stenting, would be the appropriate treatment pathway. But of those 5 million or so patients that go, under half end up being appropriate for revascularization. So for those patients, you just put them through an unnecessary invasive diagnostic, put them through unnecessary burden, unnecessary radiation exposure for both physician and for patient. And frankly, it's low margin for the facility when it doesn't lead to revascularization, and you're underserving patients who truly need that care. So, frankly put, you don't want to squirt clean coronaries. You don't want to send those patients to the cath lab if they're not moving towards revascularization. On top of that, you have patients that have significant disease but do not have a flow limiting lesion. And so these patients may be at high risk for rupture, but be sent home to suffer a major adverse cardiovascular event, maybe the next year, maybe the next month, maybe the next week. And on top of all of that, Even when put on therapeutics, they're not specific to the individual patient's disease. It's been looked at that potentially almost half of patients on statins are not responders to that therapeutic. We have all these other drugs out there like PCSK9s, canakinumab, Vasipa, colchicine, but they're not getting put on the right patients because diagnostics aren't able to identify which therapeutic is right for which patient individually. What we're doing here at Elucid is we're using artificial intelligence to analyze routine CT angiographies, and doing so, we're able to determine what is that blood flow limitation, what is that FFR, so that we can only send patients to the cath lab that are moving towards revascularization. On top of that, we're able to quantify that high risk plaque validated against histopathology. So, giving the physician information about what is that risk of plaque rupture, and by therefore understanding the urgency of the treatment. And then, on top of all of that, we are doing work that will treat cardiovascular disease more akin to how we treat cancer by identifying an individual patient's dominant mechanism of the disease non invasively so that we can finally answer the question, who is a likely responder to a PCSK9 versus a canakinumab versus a colchicine, to enable true precision medicine for cardiovascular disease for the first time.
That sounds pretty groundbreaking, and the problem sounds pretty foreboding. Is it your view that if this technology pans out and if your approach pans out, that it could change the way medicine is practiced in the United States and elsewhere?
Absolutely, Bob. So we've already seen what has occurred on the FFRCT front, with guidelines being heavily supportive as well as there being significant reimbursement. We've even seen the very, very strong adoption and a mandate that exists in the UK and strong support in Japan, and we expect to see that grow internationally. But we also expect to see plaque morphology rising to that same level of FFRCT as you lead both pieces of information in order to make an accurate treatment decision. So we expect for nearly every scan in the future that we'll be calculating both the FFRCT as well as the plaque composition. And then several years from now, we'll be including the ability to actually tell you which drug that patient might be likely to respond to. So as CTA grows on its own merits, but has also supported its growth by technologies such as ours, we expect that for every case, you'd run that CTA, you'd run these analyses, and you determine a treatment pathway for that patient individually based on their own disease.
You mentioned in earlier comments something about the FDA. Where do you stand with the FDA, which controls access to the market basically for new technologies and medications?
Absolutely. So to clarify, we are a non-invasive software analyzing CT angiographies. We are the only software, the only non-invasive tool that can quantify plaque validated against histopathology, meaning our software has been both developed and validated against live tissue specimens reviewed under microscope by pathologists, including working closely with Dr. Anu Vermani. So we have the only clearance for that validation against histopathology. We're the only tool that knows how accurate its measurements actually are. And we're the only tool cleared to quantify lipid-rich necrotic core. And we've just published and we'll soon be adding intraplaque hemorrhage.
Pretty amazing. You must have some competitors. I can't imagine there aren't other people trying to do the same thing you're doing.
Sure. So there are other software products that do quantify plaque. But what they do for their quantitation is they use Hounsfield unit thresholding. So I'm going to get a little bit more detailed on the technology side, so just bear with me for a moment.
That's okay.
So what they're doing is they're looking at this black and white CT scan that represents measures of density using Hounsfield units. And what they're doing is they're saying, based on that image, something that is darker, we're going to call that a low attenuation plaque. And something that's in the middle, we're going to call that non-calcified plaque. And something that's brighter, that's whiter, we're going to call that calcified plaque. The problem with these terms, low attenuation, non-calcified, is they don't exist in biology. They are imaging specific terms that are used that don't have a validation against histopathology. Their high watermark, what they compare to and what they have in their FDA labeling, is that of what a physician reader can do. So they are mostly an efficiency tool to try to reduce the time in this analysis of what a radiologist or a cardiologist might do when looking at the CT scan. They are not able to quantify lipid-rich necrotic core, and they're not able to quantify intraplaque hemorrhage. These tissue types are heterogeneous in nature, meaning they don't have a uniform density and are therefore unable to be characterized by Hounsfield unit thresholding. It's impossible. Our methodology is the only tool that, again, is validated against histopathology. Our high watermark is actual ground truth biology. And as such, we are able, with our methodology, to characterize lipid-rich necrotic core and intraplaque hemorrhage, taking this beyond an efficiency tool to providing information that a physician could not discern with their eyes.
I understand from my brief readings about Elucid that you differ also in that you can conduct the evaluation on site as opposed to doing it remotely. Could you talk to that a little bit?
Absolutely. So on the FFRCT side, our main competitor who's out there in the market, who should be mentioned, HeartFlow is able to conduct their analyses and is able to do so remotely, where you send them the scan and they go through their processes and then send you back the result. Part of an appeal that we have is the flexibility given our methodology that we can perform that methodology. You can send us the scan and we'll happily conduct it with our experts and physicians here and send you back the result. But alternatively, we have the ability to deploy the software fully on site so that no scans and no information leave the virtual four walls of the facility. And by doing so, if you are a facility that prefers or is mandated not to send things off site, or simply want to have greater control of the process, we are able to meet you with your needs. And we're offering that flexibility in a manner that we think best serves the customer.
What, if you can tell me, what's been the reaction so far from institutions and clinicians as to the validity and appeal of this process?
Oh, it's been extremely positive. With what we're able to do on the plaque quantitation side, physicians, frankly, have never seen anything able to do this non-invasively. There are tools out there that are in the cath lab, so call it a $4,000 to $6,000 cath, another $500 to $1,000 for use of the tool, that are able to quantify some of these plaque composition measurements. But you're not able to do that on a large volume of patients, and the expense itself sometimes may not justify the necessity of performing such a quantitation. By us being able to bring this non-invasively and provide not only the visualizations, but the discrete measurements with their validation, it's been said as game-changing for how we're conducting studies and in the future to become the standard of care for assessment of these patients. And of course, paired with FFRCT, something that immediately will make itself into a wide-scale clinical practice. So we have a fair number of clinical users now who are using it both for carotid, coronary, and even for peripheral applications. We expect to see that continue to grow in the coming years. And then in what we're doing on the virtual transcriptomics side, work we're doing to determine optimal medical therapy specific to the patient. That we believe to be completely paradigm shifting, and that's been met with an even greater deal of enthusiasm, if you can believe it. And so we're very excited to be able to take that fully through and bring that to market in the future.
Well, let's ask about, since you mentioned the market, let's ask about that. What has been the reaction and where do you plan to go with the investment community? I know a little bit about it because our company invested in Elucid, but you've got a bigger audience than just our fund, and you have ideas and plans. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So we were very happy to have your participation along with MedTex Ventures and several others as part of our Series A that we did the first close for about a year ago. And we're very excited that we're going to be taking this forward in an aggressive manner on our commercialization path, which will lead to additional rounds of funding in the near term. So there's a lot of opportunities. This market is enormous and has even already matured fairly significantly on the FFRCT front. So a lot of what we're doing moving forward is commercialization of our fully developed product and getting this into as many physician hands as possible to help as many patients as possible. Not only to prevent unnecessary invasive diagnostics, but to improve patient outcomes by better understanding the disease and better alignment of treatment to patient.
Do you have is it too early to talk about a long-term strategy, an exit plan, or anything of that kind, or is it still in development?
I would say it may be a little bit early to discuss that. I would say the opportunities that we have as a platform company are immense. It is not a single application product, and the work that we're doing on the side, some that we've discussed publicly, some that we haven't, offer a plethora of opportunities for us to move forward as a standalone company. Obviously, there is interest, and this aligns very well with some players in the med device space and big iron. But work we're doing here is fairly significant, and we're heads down at this point, focused on getting this again in as many hands as possible, helping as many patients as possible, and really pushing the boundaries of what's really capable from a non-invasive image, that's already available.
Well, thanks an awful lot, Blake, for your overview of the industry and the company. Is there anything I've left out that you'd like to add to our conversation this morning?
I think we've hit on many of the major points. The only other thing I would mention are the applications that we have for the carotid and actual estimation and prediction of patients' risk of major adverse neurological event. So what we've done coronary in terms of estimating plaque, we're able to do in the carotids as well. And we've demonstrated in studies, about a 5-site study that will soon to be published, that we estimate risk of stroke about 40% better than the current standard of care, which is based on stenosis. So this is taking information that physicians know is valuable. They know that plaque is the main cause of many of these events, but it's giving to them in a manner that's easy to digest, that's validated against histology, and that's really right at their fingertips to access. So taking the scans that they may already have. So the coronary application is, of course, a larger market, and FFRCT is a more mature market, but the applications in stroke prevention are enormous, and we're very excited about taking that forward as well.
Well, thanks, Blake, for the impressive overview this morning. We'll make sure that the audience here can reach you if they have comments or questions. And I wish you the best in your endeavors.
Perfect. Thanks so much. It was a pleasure to speak with you today, Bob.